Mr. President. I rise to contribute on the debate on the government's 24-hour economy legislation amendment, Vibrancy Reform Bill 2024. This year is tough for hospitality businesses, with the media reporting that twice as many hospitality businesses are going under versus a decade ago. Today, just under 1 million workers in New South Wales, or 21% of the total workforce, are employed in nighttime and shift work roles. Public reports suggest that Sydney's nighttime economy is estimated to be worth $27 billion annually. However, Sydney is potentially missing out on an additional $6 billion a year due to its underdeveloped nighttime economy. Sydney's arts and culture sector employs nearly 47,000 people, with the largest share in media production and broadcasting at 36%, and followed by music performing and visual arts at 20%. Sydney has the largest proportion of people employed in arts and culturally associated work in the country at 2.24%, followed by Melbourne at just 1.76%. These are significant components of our economy and society, and they drive growth through tourism and good vibes, which are infectious. The people involved in these industries are invariably small business people, enterprising individuals working in teams with tight margins and few resources, facing particularly trying times when energy costs are exorbitant and the cost of living crisis means that discretionary spending is really a luxury for many. Making life easier for these people is important if we want a thriving economy. Yet 2024 has been labelled the toughest year ever for hospitality venues, and we have seen an astounding number of venues close. I'd like to acknowledge and congratulate my coalition colleagues for their leadership on vibrancy reforms. This bill would not have been possible without the vision of former Minister for Hospitality and Racing, the Honourable Kevin Anderson, and the former Minister for Planning and Minister for Homes, the Honourable Anthony Roberts, who piloted a successful trial of our state's first entertainment precinct on Enmore Road in 2022. The original 3-month special entertainment precinct trial has now become du jour, or should I say, de la nuit, a standard approach to encouraging nightlife vibrancy. At the time, Jacqueline Cunningham, owner of the Secret Garden Bar, said being a part of the Special Entertainment Precinct is a privilege to help support the Strip's recently crowned title as the coolest street in Sydney. She says, the extended live performance and trading hours is like a stamp of approval, which gave us confidence to keep our shows on for more people to enjoy later into the night. She further explained, we hired more artists, and with great live bands, drag shows and comedies free of charge, our bar has been ever more popular amongst punters. This trial has been a win for all. As part of the pilot, noise complaints were being managed solely by Inner West Council, who were working to streamline the noise complaints process instead of multiple government agencies. The coalition government also appointed the state's first ever 24-hour economy commissioner, Michael Rodriguez, who maintains that position, and we are delighted that he does, given his passion, expertise and networks. He's incredibly dedicated and a wonderful representative of the industry. These changes were important at the time to support a hospitality industry in strife following years in the wilderness, including through the COVID pandemic. The intent of this bill is good, but there are questions that the Minister should answer to ensure clarity for industry stakeholders. And I think this bill suffers from a joint problem of being too slow, but also too rushed. We've got 18 months into the government's term. There's been tranche 1. We hear that there is another tranche after this, but the reality is that these changes could have been made earlier. They are they obviously affect a range of different pieces of legislation, but they are still things that would have been more appropriate in the first tranche, I would argue. The other aspect of this is that despite being slow in one sense, we've only had this bill for a matter of days, and in speaking to stakeholders, there is still a lack of clarity and certainty about what this means for industry, for councils, for planners. And I think that when we're considering changes that are obviously affecting quite a range of stakeholders, it is reasonable to expect that when speaking to stakeholders, they would have a better understanding of how this would actually impact them day to day and on the ground. But that's certainly not the feedback that we have been receiving so far. We know that that this bill will do some good, of course. There are clearly restrictions on development consents that currently require modifications to DAs that are incredibly onerous and costly to small businesses, and stakeholders have been crying out for changes that would streamline those processes that mean that they can actually control the activity that they want to control in their venues and premises, so that they can have 4 musicians rather than the 3 that might have been stipulated in a DA that was imposed upon them decades ago. So there are good things that will allow more improvement and vibrancy in the communities that want them most. But there is also an extraordinary amount of power vested in the minister for these changes to occur. And I wonder if that is because the details of this bill actually haven't been ironed out. And I think when we're talking, again, about a bill that reflects changes to a huge range of industry stakeholders, clarity is key. And I really couldn't say it better than the Legislation Review Committee's comment, which can be found obviously on the Parliament's website. But I want to pull out some important bits, because it really highlights that there are still details that will have potentially material effects and material negative effects on licence holders and businesses and stakeholders. The first one relates to the amendment to the Liquor Act, where an insertion of a section would allow police to issue an improvement notice to a relevant person at a licensed premises when noise is being emitted near the licensed premises by patrons of the licensed premises or staff or contractors of the licensee. And that's inserting section 75(1)(b) Roman numeral 3. But by including this, there is the creation of a power for police to issue an improvement notice without the clarification or definition as to what constitutes noise or what constitutes near the licensed premises. And this has the effect that police may actually use these regulatory powers with a fine of up to $11,000 on licence holders for premises. And without these powers being defined, what constitutes noise or where is defined as near the licensed premises, with a penalty of $11,000, really opens up the possibility of over-policing, I would argue, potentially, or at least the impact of the business to operate effectively. And it's actually difficult for licence holders to know how they should act around these poorly defined new pieces of legislation. Like what do they have to do to ensure that they're not going to get an $11,000 fine from police without the definitions of these terms made? Further, Schedule 1.3 of the bill proposes to insert Clause 20 into the Act. Clause 20 is a wide power for the Minister to delegate any of their functions, other than the power of delegation, to a public service employee or a person authorised by regulations. This is an incredibly wide delegation of statutory functions, and again, because it reflects an impact to an incredibly large class of people, and that is both the stakeholders and then the delegation powers can be to any member of the public service, means that there is a process that is unclear. It hasn't been made accountable and transparent for stakeholders to engage with, and this is a problem. We deserve, and stakeholders deserve, more detail on how the wide delegation powers are expected to be used, or at least, honestly, that they be limited to very specific circumstances, and that the Minister be very clear about where that circumstance will be relevant, because we deserve accountability and transparency, especially in matters where there is such a wide sweeping set of changes across industry. Further to this, in relation to the non-compulsory mediation scheme, there is a recognition that stakeholders deserve a better opportunity to mediate, to avoid fines, to avoid prosecution, essentially, for indiscretions that they may not have deliberately engaged in. And so we've got this non-compulsory mediation scheme, but it does mean that the minister can issue a policy about mediation between live music and performance venues and councils or private individuals that is not set out in this legislation, and it's unclear how that will actually roll out. There isn't any detail about the process of this mediation, and it has to go through the minister's office. It's something that, again, requires better definition. The definition of the types of people and organisations that can engage in this mediation scheme is also not yet clear. We've got an idea, concepts of a plan, you might say, but it's actually unclear what stakeholders will actually be able to engage with this and how the process will work functionally. There is also no mechanism for reporting through the legislation. It is something that we would want to ensure is monitored as a process, that we have reports on how many people, how many organisations request this type of mediation, how many are denied, how many have successful outcomes through this process. The reporting of this new non-compulsory mediation scheme is critical to the proper functioning of a scheme and to ensure that stakeholders are given a voice, particularly when the process is so opaque. The Legislation Committee noted that the committee generally prefers that ministerial orders are provided for by regulations to ensure an appropriate level of parliamentary oversight. This is because, unlike ministerial orders, regulations must be tabled in Parliament and therefore are subject to disallowance. So again, it's just reinforcing that ministerial orders and the involvement of the minister specifically is possibly a unique way for this to occur that sits outside the usual accountability mechanisms that we would expect for stakeholders to be able to come to this place and to be able to come to us as well to ensure the functioning of a scheme like this. Next, the power for the minister to declare a major event through an order published in the Gazette. Currently, a major event may only be declared under the Major Events Act by way of regulation. Again, this bill seeks to take out oversight from this process to the Parliament, which is something that we would want to see addressed by the minister by way of some sort of public reporting to ensure that there is clarity and transparency, not just for us as legislators, but of course for stakeholders. The bill proposes to shift the process of declaring a major event from the regulations to a ministerial order, and when a major event is declared, consequential legislative provisions are actually enlivened that deal with matters such as the management of roads and airspaces, safety and crowd management and offences. So this isn't just a matter of adding an event to a list. This actually has material impacts for the taxpayer of New South Wales, whether it is, as mentioned, something like road closures for a major event. It could be to do with transport. It's potentially significant expenditure and significant disruption to local communities and taxpayers. So the idea that this couldn't go through the Parliament, I think, needs to be addressed by the minister. The criteria to be considered in deciding whether a venue is a significant venue is apparently going to be listed in the mediation policy, Part 3, Section 19, but again, it's unclear what a significant venue is. I mean, we expect that, so it's a significant venue means a live music and performance venue that meets the criteria specific in the mediation policy, but we don't have a mediation policy, so how are stakeholders supposed to understand what is going to relate to them and when and how? And I think on that, something that I've mentioned before in relation to the Festivals Bill, for example, is that Schedules 1 and 5.1, I think it is, are to be that they are to be enacted on a date of proclamation. Once again, there is no clarity about when this actually will be enacted, which is problematic for an industry that deserves certainty, that requires certainty. Major events and even smaller events don't get organised overnight. They require stability, they require certainty, they require clarity, but we're not getting that from a lot of this bill. So I think the date of proclamation should be clarified by the Minister to ensure that stakeholders actually know what is coming and when it's coming. A sort of bizarre inclusion to this has to be the inclusion of Section 4C in the Major Events Act 2009, where the Premier may cancel or vary an order of the Minister for a major event, including a ministerial order, but giving written notice to the promoter for the event. But the Premier is not required to consult with the promoter before taking action under this section. And I just wonder if this relates to the Pandemonium Festival, which was famously cancelled earlier this year, when the Premier had to step in after an interview that occurred on 2GB. The Premier decided that the Pandemonium Festival could not go ahead in Sydney's domain on Anzac Day, as it had been advertised with the support of the Federal Minister, with the support certainly of local members of the public service who've been working to ensure that this event would go ahead. There were significant steps taken to ensure that the festival did not overlap with the Anzac Day March, importantly, and also that it respected the solemnity of Anzac Day, which is of course very important. And part of the way that they did that was to align the festival to start at the same time as the NRL just down the road. But now it's come out that certain individuals seem to be putting pressure on the Minister specifically, or on the Premier at least, and so he took the opportunity to make an individual decision to cancel this festival at the 11th hour at great cost to the festival organisers, and of course great disruption to ticket holders. And he decided that he needed to step in, obviously, because the existing processes weren't adequate, and perhaps the judgment of other ministers was not adequate to respond to the situation that he found himself in. So I just wonder why this section where the Premier may step in and override the Minister's discretion, of which there is much, and actually make decisions on behalf of this government without even consulting the people who were involved with the organisation of an event like a promoter. It's very, very strange to have that in this bill when we've got so much discretion offered to the Minister, and yet it can be trumped, it can be superseded if the big boss decides that it's all too much. And obviously he needed this to be codified, this process, so it can happen again. Finally, I wanted to note the TODs, the Transport-Oriented Development Plans that are underway at the moment. There may be potential conflicts of two government policies here. The planned TODs obviously will be substantively co-located with entertainment precincts and existing venues. They are designed to be around places where there's already hives of activity, where venues like to be because they're at a transport hub. It's easy for people to get to. So I think clarifying the mechanisms or clarifying the operation of these two policies to have sweeping changes to the ways in which local venues can amend their own development consents through council, and then the government's intention to have a huge amount of uplift in residential dwellings in particular areas, how they intersect and what the relationship is there. Obviously, building high-rise developments next to live music and pubs may not be a recipe for harmony, but the government must clarify how it will actually work in practice. And I just want to say that obviously we all want our city and our state to be vibrant. We want to make sure that there are opportunities for people to do business, to stay up late where they want to have a fun time. I think that's what it really comes down to. It's not just the economic, it's the cultural and the social. More than ever, we need spaces where we can come together as a society to find the similarities of our human experience. I think music and nightlife, being out and about in situations where we don't necessarily know everybody, we need to meet people, we get to have conversations with people that we'd never come across perhaps in our day-to-day lives at work or at home, that the real fabric of a society is made through these interactions that are not planned, that they're spontaneous, that they have these shared passions that drive the togetherness, like music. They're the things that make a city great. They're the things that make a community and a state great. And I acknowledge, of course, that this is true in regional areas as much as it is in the Sydney CBD and in other CBDs around the state. That, of course, we have things like the Tamworth Music Festival and Byron Bay Blues Fest, RIP, but these are places that people come to for years and years, who make relationships, who have opportunities to meet and to enjoy life. I mean, that's at its core what it's all about. And as a young person, possibly, I don't know if I can call myself a young person anymore. I can, thank you. I'll acknowledge all the supportive interjections. But I know there are people who are younger than me out there who really crave this opportunity as well, that at a time where young people have gone through COVID, who are seeking the human connections that we were all lucky enough to grow up with, that these opportunities to be out and about are more important than ever. And I think that for that reason, we acknowledge the intention and the aims of this bill are good, and that the opposition will be supporting the bill.